The first time I noticed him, I thought it was just my imagination. I was sitting in my living room, working on my laptop, when I caught a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of the room. It was late at night, and the only light came from my desk lamp and the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. The shadow seemed to move, but when I looked directly at it, it was gone. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light or fatigue, but as the days went by, the sightings became more frequent. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a figure, a man standing silently in the corner of my room. I would see him out of the corner of my eye, his form shifting and blending with the darkness. Every time I turned to face him directly, he vanished. The man was always the same, tall and thin, with a vague, indistinct appearance. He never moved or made a sound, and his presence was unsettling, as if he were just there, observing me. I began to feel anxious and paranoid, wondering if I was losing my mind. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a result of stress or lack of sleep. I tried changing the lighting in the room, hoping that brighter lights might dispel the shadows and alleviate the feeling of being watched. But no matter what I did, the man in the corner remained. One night, after a particularly long and exhausting day, I decided to confront my fears. I set up my camera to record the living room, hoping to capture any unusual activity. I wanted to see if there was an explanation for the strange occurrences, whether it was simply my mind playing tricks on me or something more sinister. I went to bed, leaving the camera running. The next morning, I eagerly reviewed the footage. The room was empty and quiet at first, but as the night wore on, the shadowy figure appeared in the corner. He was barely visible, but the shape was unmistakable. He stood there for hours, motionless, as if waiting for something. I was both relieved and horrified. Relieved because it confirmed that I wasn't imagining things, but horrified by the realization that someone or something had been silently watching me. I tried to find out more about the figure, searching for any possible explanations. I checked with neighbors and the building manager, but no one knew of any incidents or previous tenants who might have been involved in something sinister. As the weeks passed, the sightings grew more intense. The man in the corner seemed to become more defined, his presence more palpable. I began to notice small changes in the room, objects slightly out of place, a cold draft where there shouldn't be one. It felt like the man was trying to make his presence known, to communicate in some way. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, trying to focus on a book, when I felt a sudden chill. I glanced up and saw the man in the corner, clearer than ever. His form was more solid, and his face seemed to be slowly coming into view. It was a face I had never seen before. A gaunt, expressionless visage with hollow eyes. The sight was enough to make my blood run cold. I decided to take action. I consulted with a few friends and family members, and they all had their own theories. Some suggested it could be a psychological issue, while others mentioned the possibility of a paranormal explanation. I was skeptical of both, but the fear and anxiety were real. To deal with the situation, I started to make changes around the apartment. I rearranged the furniture, hoping that disrupting the space might somehow alter the dynamics. I even hired a professional cleaner to thoroughly cleanse the apartment, though I knew deep down that it was unlikely to make any difference. Despite my efforts, the man in the corner remained. His presence became a constant source of dread. I found myself avoiding the living room, spending most of my time in other parts of the apartment. But even then, the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow following me wherever I went. One night, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I sat in the living room, determined to face whatever was haunting me. I spoke aloud, demanding that the figure reveal itself or leave me alone. My voice was shaky, but I tried to sound authoritative. As I spoke, the temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath in the air, and a low, almost imperceptible humming filled the space. The man in the corner became more defined, his face clearer and more menacing, as if he was reacting to my challenge. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a strong gust of wind swept through the room. The figure seemed to waver and shift, as if struggling against an unseen force. I felt a surge of fear but held my ground, determined to assert my control over the situation. The lights flickered one last time before going out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, and I heard a soft, almost distant whispering. The whispering grew louder, but the words were indistinguishable. It felt like the man in the corner was trying to communicate something, but the message was lost in the chaos of the moment. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. The corner of the room was empty, and the oppressive feeling that had been hanging over me seemed to have lifted. I was exhausted and shaken, but I felt a strange sense of relief. Over the following days, the sightings of the man in the corner ceased. The apartment felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a more normal, everyday sense of calm. I hoped that my confrontation had somehow driven him away, or at least brought an end to the torment. Despite this, I remained cautious. I continued to keep an eye on the apartment, always aware of the possibility that the man might return. The experience had left a lasting impression on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had touched upon something unsettling and beyond my understanding. The man in the corner became a dark chapter in my life, a reminder of the unknown and the unsettling experiences that can occur in the most mundane of places. While the sightings eventually stopped, the memory of that eerie figure and the feeling of being watched lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates reality from the unknown. I had just finished a grueling week at work and was looking forward to a quiet weekend of relaxation. That's when I received a phone call that would change everything. It was late Friday night, and the caller ID showed an unknown number. I hesitated but answered, thinking it might be something important. "Hello," I said, my voice tired. "Is this Jason?" a deep, distorted voice asked. It was unsettling, like the caller was speaking through a filter. "Yes, who is this?" I replied, my curiosity piqued. The voice on the other end was calm but insistent. "This is regarding your recent application. We'd like to discuss it further. Can you come to our office for a meeting?" I was puzzled. I hadn't applied for anything recently, but the voice continued without giving me a chance to respond. "We need to see you in person. The meeting is scheduled from midnight tonight. The address is 347 Riverbend Street. Please be prompt." Before I could ask any more questions, the line went dead. I looked at my phone, confused and slightly unnerved. The voice had been unnaturally cold, and the timing was odd, but there was something about the call that intrigued me. I decided to go, figuring it was a prank or a mix-up that would sort itself out. I arrived at the address just before midnight. Riverbend Street was an old, abandoned area of town known for its dilapidated buildings and eerie atmosphere. The office was a rundown brick building with boarded-up windows and a flickering street lamp out front. It looked as though it had been neglected for years. I hesitated outside, my anxiety growing, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached the door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. The interior was dark, with only the faint glow of a single hanging light bulb illuminating the entrance. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. "Hello," I called out, stepping inside. There was no response. I moved further into the building, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The office was a large open room with old, broken furniture scattered around. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and the floor was littered with debris. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. I walked to the center of the room, feeling increasingly uneasy. The building was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead light. I checked my watch. It was almost midnight. Just then, I heard a door creak open in the distance. I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the low light. He approached with a slow, deliberate gait, his presence commanding and unsettling. "Mr. Jason, I presume?" he said in the same distorted voice from the phone. "Yes, that's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The man gestured toward a nearby desk where a single chair was placed in front of a large, dusty file. "Please have a seat. We have much to discuss." I sat down, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The man took a seat behind the desk, his face still hidden in the shadows. He opened the file, revealing a stack of papers. Without saying a word, he handed them to me. The documents were filled with detailed personal information about me, my address, work history, and even private conversations I had had in the past. I was shocked and disturbed. How did they have all this information? "This is a standard procedure," the man said, noticing my reaction. "We need to confirm some details before moving forward." "Moving forward with what?" I asked, trying to mask my growing fear. The man's demeanor remained calm and professional. "You applied for a position with us. The information you see is part of our vetting process. We need to ensure that you meet our requirements." I was confused. I hadn't applied for any position, and I had no idea what this was about. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. "I haven't applied for anything recently." The man's expression remained inscrutable. "Are you sure? Our records show otherwise. Perhaps you don't remember, but this appointment was scheduled weeks ago." I tried to recall any recent applications or job interviews, but nothing came to mind. The situation was growing more surreal by the minute. I wanted to leave, but something about the man's presence made me feel trapped. He continued, "This process is crucial. We need to ensure that everything is in order before we proceed. There are certain conditions that must be met." As he spoke, the room seemed to grow colder. The flickering light bulb cast strange shadows on the walls, and the air felt thick with an almost tangible tension. I could feel my pulse quickening, and the sense of unease was becoming overwhelming. "What conditions?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man handed me a second set of documents, which outlined a series of tasks and requirements. They were bizarre and nonsensical. Things like completing a series of tests and meeting certain expectations within a given time frame. The language was cryptic, and there were references to initiations and commitments that made no sense to me. "This is part of the process," the man said. "It's necessary to ensure that candidates are suited for the position." "I still don't understand what this is about," I said, standing up. "I'm leaving." The man's demeanor changed abruptly. His voice took on a more authoritative tone. "Mr. Jason, I must insist that you stay. The appointment is not yet complete. Leaving now could have consequences." I felt a surge of panic. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. I realized that I was no longer in control of the situation. The man's words were clear. I had to stay, or there would be repercussions. Desperate, I tried to reason with him. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but I need to leave. This isn't right." The man's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "I understand your concerns, but it is imperative that you complete the appointment. It is for your own benefit." I was trapped. I had no choice but to comply. I sat back down and began to go through the tasks outlined in the documents, feeling a sense of dread with every step. The man watched silently, his presence a constant reminder of the strange and unsettling nature of the meeting. Hours seemed to pass as I completed the tasks. The room remained eerily quiet, and the man never spoke again. By the time I finished, it was nearly dawn. The man stood up and handed me a final document. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said. "You may leave now." I took the document and hurried out of the building, my mind racing with questions. The night had been surreal, and the experience left me feeling deeply unsettled. I tried to make sense of it all, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. When I looked at the final document, it was blank. There was no information, no details, just a clean sheet of paper. It was as if the entire meeting had never happened. I never received any follow-up communication, and I couldn't find any trace of the office building or the man. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. I tried to forget about the appointment and move on with my life, but the memory of that night haunted me to this day. I still wonder about the true nature of the meeting and what it was that I was actually subjected to. The experience remains a dark and unsettling chapter in my life, a reminder of the strange and inexplicable events that can occur in the most unexpected places. I've always loved the quiet sanctuary of the local library. It's a haven where I can escape the hustle and bustle of daily life and lose myself in books. That's why it was unusual when, last summer, I found myself haunted by a seemingly innocuous library book. It all began with a routine visit to the library. I had just finished a mystery novel and needed something new to read. I found a book that piqued my interest, a classic detective story I hadn't read before. I checked it out, eager to dive into the new read. As I left the library, I noticed a strange smell emanating from the book, an earthy, musty odor that I initially dismissed as just the scent of old paper. I took it home and began reading. The story was engaging, but as I progressed, I noticed something odd about the book. Certain passages seemed to resonate eerily with recent events in my life, almost as if the book were reflecting my own experiences. I chalked it up to coincidence and continued reading. However, the more I delved into the book, the stranger things became. The narrative seemed to mirror events that hadn't yet happened, predicting minor occurrences in my life with unnerving accuracy. It was as if the book were a living entity, its plot shifting to align with my own experiences. One evening, as I was reading, I came across a passage describing a character being stalked by an unseen presence. The description was chillingly similar to a feeling I'd been having for weeks, like I was being watched. The passage described the character hearing faint whispers and seeing shadows moving in the corners of their vision. My skin crawled as I read these words, the sense of foreboding becoming almost unbearable. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to return the book and report the strange occurrences to the library staff. Maybe it was just a bizarre coincidence or a prank, I thought. I packed the book in my bag and went to the library the next day. When I arrived, the library was unusually quiet. The normally bustling space was almost deserted. I approached the front desk and explained the situation to the librarian, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Thompson. She listened attentively but seemed skeptical. She assured me that the book would be investigated and took it from me. That evening, I felt a strange sense of relief. I hoped that returning the book would put an end to the eerie coincidences and unsettling feelings. However, that night, the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. Shadows danced on the walls, and every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified. I could hear faint whispers, but when I tried to locate the source, there was nothing there. The next morning, I received a phone call from Mrs. Thompson. Her voice was strained and urgent. "Jason, I need you to come back to the library. There's something you need to see. I hurried back to the library, my anxiety mounting. When I arrived, Mrs. Thompson led me to a small, dimly lit room in the back of the building. The room was filled with old, dusty bookshelves and boxes of records. I'm not sure how to explain this, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice trembling, but when I looked into the book you returned, I found something disturbing. She handed me a folder containing photographs and documents. I looked through them and was shocked by what I saw. The book was part of a collection donated by a private collector years ago. The collector had been known for his interest in rare and unusual items. But the real shock came when I saw documents detailing the book's history. It turned out that the book had a dark past. It was associated with a series of strange occurrences and disappearances in the area over the years. The collector had apparently been obsessed with the book and had conducted his own investigations into its origins. The documents included reports of people experiencing disturbing visions and feeling watched after coming into contact with the book. Mrs. Thompson's face was pale as she continued, "There's more. The book was removed from the library's catalog years ago because of these reports. It was supposed to be destroyed, but somehow it ended up back on the shelves." My heart raced as I read the documents. It seemed like the book had a sinister influence, and somehow it had managed to affect my life in a disturbing way. I felt a wave of relief and fear wash over me. The book was gone, but the lingering effects of its presence still unsettled me. Mrs. Thompson assured me that the book would be removed from the library's collection for good, and she promised that any records related to it would be carefully examined. I thanked her and left the library, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Despite the book being gone, the strange occurrences continued for a few days. The feeling of being watched persisted, and I continued to experience unsettling coincidences and eerie sensations. It was as if the book had left a lasting mark on my life, even after its physical presence was removed. Gradually, the feeling subsided, and I was able to return to a sense of normalcy. However, the experience left me deeply disturbed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the book had somehow tapped into something dark and unsettling, and its influence had extended beyond its pages. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me. I avoided the library for a while and focused on moving forward with my life, but the memory of the book and the strange events it triggered lingered in my mind. To this day, I can't help but wonder about the true nature of the book and the forces it may have unleashed. It remains a dark and unsettling chapter in my life, a reminder of the strange and inexplicable things that can happen when we least expect them. The overdue library book had revealed a side of reality far more unsettling than any fictional story, and its shadow continues to loom over me, a haunting reminder of the thin boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary.